When we think about the Roman Senate, we think about an illustrious lot of high-ranking Roman aristocrats from old and noble Roman families, which upheld the old values of the Roman Republic. They convened in the Senate House, in the Forum Romanum, the Curia Julia, as it was called. They debated over political issues of the Roman Empire and they cared after the city of Rome itself. They signed off new laws in unison with the emperor, and we always assumed that they wanted the best for the Roman Empire. And then, when the Roman Empire fell, the poor old senators were mercilessly hunted down by the evil barbarians, and then they vanished. That is at least the romanticized version of the Roman Senate, which we all too often see depicted in pop culture. But what if I told you that the reality was quite different? What if I actually told you that the Roman Senate played a crucial role in the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and that it was in large part due to their scheming and their corruptedness and their constant meddling that the Roman Empire fell? The history of the Roman Senate is a long one, and I already talked about the more than 1300 years spanning story of the Senate of Rome, from the founding of the city itself under Romulus in 753 BC until the early 7th century. So for around 1350 years did the Senate of Rome play an important role in shaping the city of Rome itself and then the Republic. But many think that with the fall of the Roman Republic, so did the power of the Senate wane, and that by the time of the emperors, this assembly of old men was more tradition than having real power. And yes, this might have been so at times, but in reality, many emperors met with the Senate and issued laws together, the Senate often ratifying the laws that the emperor had proposed. Clashes with the Senate were common, and some emperors had a very bad standing with this old illustrious body, sometimes even leading to violence and to executions of senators, or, in turn, assassinations of emperors instigated by senators. It was in the late stages of the crisis of the 3rd century that the power of the Senate waned, or so it is commonly told. The last emperor to acknowledge the importance of the Senate, it is often said, was Probus, whose nomination was formally accepted by the Senate of Rome, like in the old days, because already Diocletian, not long later, chose to ignore the Senate, which is why he didn't want to make his residence at Rome, but instead chose to reside at Nicomedia, far away from the Roman senators, where they didn't hold any power. And this trend would only continue further. Diocletian's model of ruling without consent of the Senate, the dominate, was of course copied. Because who would want to share power with an assembly of politicians when one could also rule alone, uncontested? A notable exception here that has to be mentioned and which is sadly often overlooked was the Emperor Maxentius. In a time where people like Diocletian or Constantine had chosen to rule from other places, he not only remained in Rome and wanted to renew Rome, make it again the glorious capital of the empire by adding many impressive, grandiose buildings to its already impressive array of monuments. But no, he also respected the rights of the Senate and often held assemblies there, asking the senators for their opinions on certain political matters and ratifying laws together with the senators. However, after the death of Maxentius, we could say that the Senate too would lose a lot of its ancient power. And thus, for the next century, we could even say, especially when the emperors now chose to rule from Constantinople, understandably, the Senate of Rome held almost no political power anymore. They merely governed the city of Rome itself and the immediately surrounding countryside. But the days of old political prestige seemed largely numbered. If you are a fan of Roman history and you would want to buy an item for yourself or someone else as a present, then you might want to consider the SPQR Shop. They produce incredible replicas of Roman history with a very high attention to detail. All their items are carefully handcrafted, and I think it will be difficult to find that level of craftsmanship anywhere else. They handcraft Roman coin replicas, rings, pendants, attributes, and many other items of Roman history. If you want to support the channel, or if you want to buy a present for someone who likes Roman history, please go and check out their excellent site, link in the description. If you buy over this link, you will receive a 20% price reduction, which I personally find very generous. Thank you very much for your consideration, and back to the video. But then something strange happened. When the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III chose to move the imperial residence from Ravenna back to Rome in the year 450 AD, the proximity of the emperor to the Senate revitalized the importance of that old illustrious body. Suddenly, the senators were delighted to have the emperor once again nearby, in the palace on the Palatine Hill, as in the old days, as in the days of Maxentius 140 years earlier, as in the days of Aurelian 180 years earlier, as in the days of Augustus himself 450 years earlier. And so, the power and influence of the Senate began to increase again. Often the emperor would consult the Senate in the Curia Julia, in the Forum Romanum on certain matters, and often the emperor would speak before the Senate. When Valentinian III murdered his best general, Flavius Aetius, in that fateful, evil, and quite frankly stupid decision, in the year 454, he declared before the Senate, in the Curia Julia, that Aetius was a traitor of the state. Aetius' body was displayed in the Forum Romanum for everyone to see, just like in the old days. And when later in turn Valentinian III was murdered in 455 by Petronius Maximus, it is very likely that Petronius did so with permission of the majority of the senators, because Petronius himself was a senator and thus a member of that old illustrious body. It is not hard to imagine that the Senate had now seen its time come, that after 500 years it would be able to increase its power again, that after all that time one of their own would be emperor, thus granting the Senate many favors and powers. Because Petronius himself was a senator and thus a member of that old illustrious body. But we know how that story ended. Even though Valentinian III was a bad emperor, his murder massively destabilized the Western Roman Empire. There was chaos, there was a power vacuum. The death of a legitimate member of the Theodosian dynasty meant that the new emperor had no legitimacy whatsoever. The Germanics used that instability to their advantage, greatly increasing their dominions, attacking in a concerted effort from all sides. And then Rome even got sacked by the Vandals as a direct consequence in 455, seeing the most severe and brutal sack of the city ever, paling the sack of 410 by its sheer thoroughness of looting. This was the first time that the ambitions of the Roman Senate would spell doom for the Western Empire, but it sure wouldn't remain the last time. A few years passed and the Emperor Majorian was now in power, vowing to restore the Western Roman Empire to its former glory and to reconquer the lost lands, which the Western Roman Empire had held until just a few decades prior. And things were going quite well. But the Roman senators were quite unhappy, because many of Majorian's laws were detrimental to them. Majorian recognized the problems of the Western state, and basically every single one of the laws he issued addressed key issues that the empire faced. And one big problem was corruption. Majorian cracked down on corruption like no emperor before him in ages, and many, if not most, of the Roman senators were quite corrupt. They profited massively from withholding taxes for their own purposes, where quite often, coins strangely seemed to vanish, while the wealth and the size of the senators' villas strangely kept increasing. And so it shouldn't surprise us that many senators already started scheming against Majorian even while he was campaigning against the Germanic tribes in Gaul and Spain, with great success, as I should add. and they chose the Magister Militum Ricimer as their preferred man of power. Indeed, there must have been many meetings between Ricimer and the senators of Rome, who feared that the virtuous Emperor Majorian would rob them of their illegally amassed riches and their luxurious villas, which many of them possessed in the countryside near Rome. So it shouldn't surprise us that Ricimer felt emboldened, taking the step to betray the emperor, intercepting him at Dertona and treacherously killing him in the year 461. It should also not surprise us that Ricimer's choice for Majorian's successor was Livius Severus, who not only was a high-ranking member of Rome's aristocracy, but yes, you guessed it, was very likely also a senator of Rome. Very interesting, isn't it? Again, the Senate saw their chance come to have once again one of their own as emperor. And indeed, they had succeeded in their mission. But unfortunately, the times were very different now from the times of the Republic. The emperor in those times should have been a capable general, always on the front lines with a good knowledge of military strategy. A Roman senator, as romantic as the notion probably seemed to the old senators of Rome, that one of their own would now reside in the old palace of the Caesars on the Palatine Hill, as nice as this notion might have looked to them, it didn't make a lot of strategic sense in a time where Rome was being encroached by barbarians from all sides. And so naturally, Livius Severus, the old senator, was not able to hold Majorian's reconquests, and the Germanics again expanded unchecked. For what could an old Roman aristocrat from Rome do to stop this? A man with no military experience whatsoever, especially when the general of the West was a barbarian called Ricimer, who was not really interested in restoring the old Roman Empire, but who seemingly was much more content to just defend Italy. And only a few years later, we would again see how the constant scheming and meddling of the Roman Senate would lead to very bad outcomes for the Western Roman Empire. We can assume that the Senate of Rome was very unhappy when the Eastern Roman Emperor Leo sent one of his protégés, a general called Anthemius, to be the new emperor of the West. They of course feared that they would lose their newfound power. So it shouldn't surprise us in the least that when the civil war between Anthemius and Ricimer broke out, that many senators actually again sided with Ricimer against Anthemius, whom they oftentimes saw as a Greek intruder. By that time, many, if not most of the Roman senators were Christians, and so the pagan sympathies of Anthemius certainly estranged the Christian senators, who then chose to side with Ricimer. Of course, Anthemius was probably quite beloved by the few still remaining pagan senators, but we can assume that they were in that time already the minority, not the majority anymore. And so, in choosing to side with Ricimer, the senators dealt the killing blow to the Western Roman Empire. For as soon as Anthemius was killed in the battle for Rome of the year 472, the Senate again, together with Ricimer, elevated one of their own, a man called Anicius Olybrius, to the Western Roman throne. Olybrius was, again unsurprisingly, a member of the Anici, an old illustrious Roman family, and a senator. Again, many senators were probably thinking that their time to shine had come once again. But Olybrius already died a few months after his elevation in late 472, and so did Ricimer in that same year. And then, a few years later, it should also not surprise us in the least that again, the majority of the Roman senators did not side with Romulus Augustus or Julius Nepos. No, they sided with Odoacer. Yes, the majority of the Roman senators sided with Odoacer when this Germanic general took over power in Ravenna and deposed the boy emperor Romulus Augustus. In a fragment by the Eastern Roman historian Malchus, we can read, "The Senate of Rome had chosen Odoacer, a man of military and political experience to safeguard their own affairs, and had determined that Zeno should confer upon him the rank of a patrician and entrust him the government of Italy. And thus, the so-called fall of Rome was, contrary to many depictions in movies, very much done in accordance with the Senate of Rome. Most Roman senators were in fact probably quite happy to finally get rid of the position of Western Roman Emperor. They had tried many times in the last decades to install one of their own onto the Western Roman throne, and every time they had tried to do so, this had ended in disaster. Maybe they were quite content with just one Roman emperor sitting far away in Constantinople, far removed from them, so that they would now have uncontested power in the city of Rome and surrounding areas. Indeed, counterintuitively, the power of the Senate would now actually increase again after the deposition of Romulus Augustus in 476 AD. There was now no emperor anymore in Rome who could contest their power. And Odoacer was a military man, not too interested in meddling with the affairs of the Senate. Indeed, now again, the Roman senators could decide what to do in Rome. They sent envoys to Odoacer in Ravenna, always holding up good relations with him. And they also sent envoys to the Eastern Roman Emperor at Constantinople. It seemed now as if their star had finally risen. But in doing so, they had caused irreparable damage to the Western Roman Empire, and they had actively helped in ending the line of Western Roman emperors. Had they been less selfish, the position of Western Roman Emperor might have survived. And then the Emperor Justinian would not have attacked the West in 536 and following years. And the war that then started, that Gothic War, was what broke the neck of the Roman Senate. For the Emperor Justinian feared the Senate of Rome and their ambitions, and quickly stripped the Roman senators of basically all their political powers. Therefore, it is no surprise that not long after the Gothic Wars had ended, so would the Senate of Rome vanish. So the greed and self-interest of the Roman Senate not only caused in great parts the Western Roman Empire to end, but it would also actually cause a chain of events that would lead to the Gothic Wars, and which would then, in turn, end the Roman Senate itself. And this story shows impressively that very often greed and self-interest will destroy the very things that in the beginning it wanted to protect. And so the tale of the Senate of Rome in the late Western Roman Empire, and how its meddling and scheming led to the fall of that Western Empire and ultimately to the fall of the Senate itself, is a tale that politicians of our time should very much pay close attention to. If you liked this video, please consider supporting this channel via Patreon or via YouTube membership, because it is your support that makes this channel possible. You would have my utmost gratitude. And I would especially like to thank our new Caesar supporter, Steve Reed. Thank you so much, Steve Reed, for supporting Maiorianus in such a generous way. I think Majorian himself would be proud. And of course, I want to thank everybody who supports Maiorianus. You people are amazing. And if you want to learn more about when and how exactly the Senate of Rome disappeared, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about the Senate of Constantinople, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.